My name is Wilma Thompson, and I was 32 years old when I learned that silence, real silence, the kind that doesn't beg or explain, can be sharper than any scream. This happened 6 months ago, long enough for the shock to stop knocking the wind out of me at random moments, long enough for the rage to settle into something colder, cleaner, like a blade you keep polished in a drawer, just in case. My best friend keeps saying, Wilma, this is a story people need to hear. That it's the kind of betrayal that feels scripted until you realize the details are too specific to be fiction. So here it is, the whole thing, from the beginning. I've worked in finance since college, not the glamorous kind people imagine. No champagne lunches, no smug Wall Street cliches, just long hours, fluorescent lights, and spreadsheets so dense you start dreaming in formulas. I joined a mid-sized investment firm in Denver right after graduation. Same pressure as New York, less ego in the air, better mountains in the distance. I climb fast. Junior analyst to vice president by 28. I specialized in corporate restructuring, turnarounds, cost cuts, operational fixes, companies on the edge of collapse. I wasn't drawn to chaos because I liked it. I was drawn to it because I could see patterns. I could spot where money leaked, where leadership lied, where a confident handshake hid a weak foundation. That's how I met Richard Caldwell. Richard was my mentor, late 60s, old school, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. He could shred your work with one raised eyebrow. We met weekly, and every meeting felt like walking into a quiet storm. I'd bring my analysis, proud of it, and he'd tear it apart with brutal precision. He taught me more about business than any MBA ever could. Not theory, reality. The way people protect their power, the way companies rot from the inside long before they ever file bankruptcy. Richard also had a consulting firm he'd built over 20 years. Not flashy, but profitable. Mid-sized businesses, restructuring, operational overhauls, corporate surgery without blood. When he first pulled me into it, the firm had about 40 employees. I was already working insane hours at my main job, but I still took on his side operation because I wasn't just learning, I was sharpening. Every project was a masterclass. Every mistake was corrected in real time. Then Richard's health started declining. Heart issues, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that his doctors told him to slow down or risk not waking up one morning. Richard was stubborn, kept working until his wife practically threatened to leave if he didn't stop. That's when he offered me the deal that would later become the loaded gun on the table. He wanted to step back completely, but he didn't want to sell the firm to an outsider. Not to a corporate buyer who'd gut it and lay off loyal employees. He wanted continuity. He wanted someone who respected what he built. So he proposed a structure. I would buy 60% ownership, he would keep 20% for retirement income, and his son, David Caldwell, would keep the remaining 20%. David was already the chief operating officer, running day-to-day operations. The catch was secrecy. Richard insisted the ownership structure remain confidential. His reasoning made sense, logically. If clients heard the founder had stepped back, they might lose confidence. If employees heard there was new ownership, they might panic. Better to let everyone believe Richard was still quietly running things from behind the curtain while David handled operations in the spotlight. And I agreed. I liquidated my retirement accounts, took loans, maxed out credit lines. I spent basically every dollar I had, plus years of structured payouts, to secure controlling interest in a company where only 3 people would know who truly owned it. Richard, David, and me. To everyone else, David was the boss. To everyone else, I was invisible. It worked at first. David handled client meetings, personnel decisions, and internal leadership. I reviewed quarterly reports, approved major expenditures, and provided strategic input during private meetings at Richard's house. From the outside, it looked like I was simply a finance professional at an investment firm across town, a friendly contact, someone who offered occasional advice. And I liked it that way. Power is easier to hold when nobody's trying to take it from you. Which brings me to Ethan. I met Ethan 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser my investment firm sponsored. He worked in commercial real estate, leasing, property management, corporate properties around Denver. He was sharp, charming, and socially effortless in a way that made everyone feel chosen when he spoke to them. We met at a silent auction. The conversation started with a joke about someone bidding too aggressively on a wine basket and turned into an hour-long debate about market cycles, careers, and what it means to build something instead of just inheriting it. Our first few dates were easy. Dinner, a baseball game, normal things that felt unusually steady. By date 3, I thought, this is different. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt real. My parents loved him. His parents loved me. His father, Greg, bonded with me over home improvement projects. His mother, Patricia, treated me like I'd already married into the family. They started including me in holiday plans, family photos, little jokes about when you two finally make it official. 6 months into dating, Ethan told me his firm needed help optimizing their investment property portfolio. Cost leaks, inefficient processes, management issues, the exact kind of work Richard's consulting firm excelled at. So I did what I always did. I connected the right people. I introduced Ethan to David. David's team went in, analyzed the operation, and implemented changes that saved Ethan's company around 30% in operating costs within the first year. Ethan got a bonus for bringing in the connection. His boss praised him publicly. Everyone was happy. And Ethan started interacting with David regularly. Progress meetings, strategy reviews, emails, calls. It was professional, logical, expected. Ethan would come home and tell me how impressed his company was, how David's team was crushing it. I'd nod along, proud that my investment was performing well and happy that I'd helped Ethan's career. Meanwhile, David and I were still meeting quarterly at Richard's house. The reports looked great. Revenue growth, strong margins, company expansion, employee retention. The firm had grown to around 60 employees. On paper, everything was thriving. I trusted David completely. And maybe that's the part that makes me the angriest, how thoroughly I trusted him. 4 months before everything exploded, Ethan and I got engaged. I proposed at a mountain resort after a weekend trip. Sunset, the whole romantic setup he'd hinted he wanted. Ethan cried, said yes immediately, and posted it online within 5 minutes, like he couldn't wait for the world to know. We started planning right away. Venues, flowers, cakes. Ethan dragged me to consultations like our lives depended on choosing the perfect shade of white. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and when he started pulling away emotionally, I explained it to myself the way women are trained to. Stress, work, wedding planning. He's just tired. But then came the small things, the kind you don't notice until they pile up. Late nights increased, 3 or 4 times a week. Weekend meetings became common. Ethan's phone was always face down. He'd text through dinner and tell me it was work stuff. Intimacy dropped off like someone flipped a switch. I tried not to become the suspicious fiancé. I tried to be the cool, supportive partner, the rational one. But something started to itch under my skin. Ethan began mentioning David more, not casually, specifically. David was so driven. David was so impressive in meetings. David really understood strategy. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, Ethan started comparing me to him. David networks better. David commands a room. David has that leadership thing. I would smile, even laugh sometimes, because jealousy felt like an emotion I didn't have time for. I was not insecure. I was not the type to compete with anyone. But admiration can sound like worship when it's repeated enough. And somewhere in the background, like a shadow that never fully steps into the light, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Claire, started popping up again. A mention here, a story there. An old text that just came through because she needed advice. Nothing dramatic, nothing you can confront without looking paranoid. Just reminders that Ethan had a past, and that some people don't like staying in it. At the time, I thought the danger was external. I didn't realize the real threat was already inside my house, inside my life, and, quietly, inside my business. And the scariest part? Ethan smiled at me every night like nothing was wrong, like we were still building something, like I wasn't standing on the edge of a trapdoor I didn't even know existed. If you ask anyone who's been betrayed, they'll tell you the same thing. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It drips. At first, I told myself I was overthinking everything. I'm a finance person. Pattern recognition is my curse. When you're trained to spot anomalies, you sometimes see danger where there's only coincidence. That's what I kept telling myself about Ethan. He'd always been ambitious. That hadn't changed. Commercial real estate doesn't run on 9-to-5 schedules, and I knew that. Late meetings, Client dinners, emergency calls, it all came with the territory. But ambition has a rhythm, and Ethan's rhythm was suddenly off. He stopped telling me details. Before, he'd come home energized, venting about difficult clients or celebrating small wins. Now his stories were vague. Long day? Same stuff? Just work. He stopped asking about my day, too. I didn't notice it all at once. It showed up in pieces. Conversations that died halfway through. Eye contact that didn't quite land. His laugh arriving a beat late, like he was somewhere else first. Physical distance followed emotional distance, like it always does. At first it was subtle, turning away sooner in bed, falling asleep faster. Then it became routine excuses. Too tired, too stressed, too distracted. I stopped initiating because rejection, even gentle rejection, leaves marks. I told myself relationships go through phases. Then came the apartment. The consulting firm owned several properties we'd acquired during restructuring projects, assets transferred as part of distressed deals. One of them was a well-maintained two-bedroom apartment downtown. Good building, great location. Market rent would have been high. David had been living there temporarily while his house was under renovation due to water damage. When his renovation wrapped up, the apartment was about to sit empty. Around the same time, Ethan's lease was coming up. He'd been complaining for months about his place, noise, management issues, endless maintenance delays. One night over dinner, he joked, "Must be nice to have access to company apartments." David laughed and said, "Actually, the downtown one is opening up." It was said lightly, casually, like a joke that wasn't really a joke. Later that night, David called me to ask if Ethan could rent it short-term while he looked for something permanent, below market rate, furnished, no vacancy loss for the company. From a business perspective, it was clean, logical, efficient. I approved it without hesitation. Ethan was thrilled. He hugged me like I'd just handed him a winning lottery ticket, thanked me repeatedly, said it would make his life so much easier. I told myself this was what supportive partners did, leverage their resources to help each other grow. Move-in was seamless. The apartment was already furnished, close to his office, 40% below market rent. He couldn't stop talking about how lucky he was. The first real crack showed up 2 months later. I got off work early one Wednesday and decided to surprise him. No warning. Just a thought. We could grab dinner, be spontaneous, remind ourselves who we are outside of schedules. I used my key. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just wrong. There were men's shoes by the door that weren't mine, a different brand of shampoo in the shower, a second toothbrush sitting too comfortably in the holder to be new, 2 coffee mugs in the sink, one with a lipstick mark that wasn't mine. When I asked about it, Ethan's response came too fast. He said he'd had friends over. His brother had crashed there after a late night. The extra toothbrush was a spare. The shoes belonged to a coworker who'd changed before a meeting. Each explanation on its own made sense. Together they felt rehearsed. He got defensive, not angry, but sharp, like my questions had crossed some invisible line. I backed off, because confrontation without proof makes you the villain. But I started paying attention. David stopped attending our quarterly meetings at Richard's house. He sent detailed reports instead, citing scheduling conflicts. Richard mentioned it once, casually, but something about his tone lingered. David had never skipped those meetings before. Ethan, meanwhile, talked about David more. Not just professionally, personally. David's leadership style, David's vision, David's work ethic, David's presence in meetings. It went beyond admiration. It felt comparative. I'd hear things like, "David really commands respect," followed by, "Not everyone has that kind of authority." Sometimes he'd laugh afterward, like it was a joke. It never felt like one. Then came the weekend that broke my ability to pretend. Ethan told me he had a work conference in Chicago, Friday to Sunday, packed a bag, kissed me goodbye, said he'd call when he got to the hotel. It was routine, except for one detail. Earlier that week, I'd been in a meeting with his company's finance team. I'd seen their calendar. No Chicago conference, no approved travel, no expense allocations. At first, I assumed I'd misread something. Then I checked his location sharing. He'd set it up months earlier for safety, especially since I traveled occasionally for work. He'd forgotten it was still on. Ethan wasn't in Chicago. He was in Breckenridge, a resort town, 90 minutes away. My chest went cold. There were innocent explanations. Conferences change locations. Calendars get updated late. Mistakes happen. But my instincts, the same ones that had saved failing companies, were screaming. Saturday afternoon, I drove up. I told myself I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, that I'd feel ridiculous when I was wrong, that we'd talk about trust and boundaries and move on. I found his car in the resort parking lot. Inside the lobby, I asked the front desk if they had a reservation under his name. They did. Room 342. The elevator ride felt endless. My heart was pounding, but my thoughts were eerily calm. That's how I get when decisions are imminent. Emotion steps aside and clarity takes over. I knocked. There was movement inside, low voices, shuffling. The door opened. Ethan stood there in a hotel robe, hair messy, eyes wide. Behind him, sitting on the bed in boxers and a t-shirt, was David. Time slowed. No yelling, no tears, no scene. Just a long, quiet moment where everyone understood exactly what had been destroyed. And Ethan, my fiancé, the man who had promised me a future, looked at me and said the words that changed everything. "Wilma, this isn't what it looks like." I didn't respond. Because some lies don't deserve the courtesy of an answer. Silence has weight. I felt it settle between the three of us the moment Ethan finished that sentence. The one every cheater seems to memorize like a script. This isn't what it looks like. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step inside the room. I just stood there, letting my eyes take in the details my mind had already confirmed. The rumpled sheets, 2 suitcases, the half-empty bottle of wine on the nightstand. Behind Ethan, David wouldn't meet my gaze. He sat on the edge of the bed like a child waiting for a verdict, hands clasped, shoulders tight. The man who ran my company, who thought he ran my company, suddenly looked very small. Ethan started talking fast, too fast. He said they were just talking, that work had gotten complicated, that emotions had crossed lines, but nothing physical had happened. Every sentence insulted my intelligence a little more than the last. I let him talk for about 30 seconds. Then I asked one question. How long? Ethan froze. David answered. 3 months. 3 months. Not a drunken mistake. Not a moment of weakness. A season. A routine. An entire quarter of my life quietly stolen while I planned a wedding and trusted 2 people who had no respect for me. 3 months meant it started before the proposal, which meant Ethan had knelt in front of me with a ring while already sleeping with someone else. He'd let me cry, let me say yes, let me imagine a future, while he was actively dismantling it. The realization hit like a physical blow. Every late night, every excuse, every comparison between me and David replayed in my head with brutal clarity. The apartment, the work trips, the distance, none of it had been stress. It had been strategy. Ethan reached for my arm. "Wilma, please, we can talk about this. We can work through it." I stepped back. The disgust surprised me. It was sharp, immediate, like my body rejecting something toxic. That's when David stood up, and that was his mistake. He straightened his shoulders, slipped into the posture I'd seen him use in boardrooms and client pitches. Authority, confidence, control. He tried to take charge of the moment like it was a meeting gone off script. "Wilma," he said, calm but firm, "I know this is upsetting, but you need to understand. Ethan and I have a real connection. This isn't some fling. We're planning a future." I looked at Ethan. Ethan looked surprised. "Interesting," David continued, emboldened by his own voice. "And you need to be realistic here. Ethan's career depends on his relationship with my company. Your involvement is peripheral. If you make this difficult, it's going to hurt him professionally." Then he delivered the line that sealed everything. "What are you going to do about it? I run that company." I smiled. Not because it was funny, because clarity had finally arrived. David thought he was untouchable, thought I was just the woman on the sidelines, a fiancé with feelings, a connection maker with no leverage. He had forgotten one detail. I didn't correct him. Not then. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Ethan protested. David looked confused. I told them to enjoy their weekend. Then I left. The drive back to Denver was surreal. My thoughts oscillated between white noise and ruthless precision, personal betrayal, professional betrayal, financial betrayal, all wrapped into one perfectly executed lie. By the time I got home, the decisions were already made. This wasn't going to be emotional chaos. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic confrontations. This was going to be business. The first call I made was to Richard. I told him everything. No emotion, just facts. The silence on the other end told me how deeply disappointed he was in his son. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "What do you need from me?" "Your support," I said, "at a board meeting, Monday morning. I'm exercising my rights as majority shareholder." You have it, he said without hesitation. I'll be there. My next call was to the corporate attorney who'd structured the ownership deal. I explained the situation. She didn't hesitate. Clear misconduct, she said. Abuse of company resources, conflict of interest. You're well within your rights. Then HR, then the CFO. Both had been with the firm since the early days. Both knew the real ownership structure. I spent the rest of the weekend doing what I do best. Documenting. Screenshots of Ethan's location data. Credit card statements showing charges at the Breckenridge Resort. Charged to company accounts under client development. Emails between Ethan and David, pulled from company servers where business correspondence had conveniently bled into personal arrangements. Everything was labeled, backed up, organized. Ethan called 20 times. I didn't answer. Sunday night, I sent one message. We're done. Don't contact me again. He called immediately. I declined. Another text came through, asking about the apartment, his lease, where he was supposed to go. I replied with one word. No. Monday morning, I walked into the consulting firm for the first time as what I actually was. The owner. The receptionist looked up when I walked in. She'd seen me before, of course, around the building, in meetings, quietly in the background, always polite, always secondary. That morning, I was wearing a tailored navy suit instead of my usual business casual, hair pulled back, expression neutral. I'm here for the 9 o'clock board meeting, I said calmly. She checked the calendar, hesitated for half a second, then nodded and pointed toward the conference room. When I walked in, Richard was already seated at the table. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The man who had built this company from nothing sat with his hands folded, eyes tired but resolved. He gave me a nod, supportive, silent. The HR director and CFO arrived next, both looking concerned. Emergency board meetings tend to have that effect. Then David walked in. At first, he looked confused. Then he saw me sitting at the head of the table. The color drained from his face. Wilma, what are you doing here? He asked, forcing a laugh. I didn't answer. I waited until everyone was seated. Then I stood. My name is Wilma Thompson, I said evenly. As of 3 years ago, I own 60% of this company. Richard Caldwell owns 20%. David Caldwell owns the remaining 20%. This structure has been kept confidential for continuity and stability. The room went silent. The HR director and CFO nodded. They already knew. David stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. I continued. I'm calling this emergency meeting to address executive misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the screen. A photo, timestamp visible. David and Ethan in the hotel room. David shot to his feet. This is personal. I'm not finished, I said, my voice level. Please sit down. He did. Over the past 3 months, I continued, David has used company resources to conduct a personal affair with a client contact, who is also my former fiancé. This includes misuse of company credit cards, abuse of corporate housing, and creating significant conflicts of interest. Next slide. Credit card statements. Highlighted charges at the Breckenridge Resort. Next slide. Records showing the downtown apartment being used during periods when David claimed it was vacant. When confronted, I added, looking directly at him, David attempted to intimidate me by asserting that he ran the company and that I could not take action against him. The HR director's pen moved faster. The CFO looked physically ill. Richard lowered his head. David found his voice again. You can't fire me over this. I built this company. Revenue doubled under my leadership. As majority shareholder, I replied calmly, I absolutely can. The affair is personal. The misuse of company assets, conflicts of interest, and attempted abuse of authority are not. I turned to HR. Please prepare termination paperwork for David Caldwell. Termination for cause. Effective immediately. No severance. David exploded. Accusations. Shouting. Threats of lawsuits. I let him speak for 30 seconds. Then I said, security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. All company devices, keys, and access credentials are to be surrendered. Richard finally spoke. His voice was quiet but final. David, stop. You did this to yourself. That broke him. By noon, the company-wide email went out. David Caldwell has departed the firm for personal reasons. Wilma Thompson will be assuming an active leadership role. 2 hours later, I made the call to the building manager. Ethan's lease was terminated. 72 hours to vacate. My phone exploded. Ethan, his brother, mutual friends. I didn't engage. One message stood out. You're ruining my life over a mistake. I replied once. You made a choice. These are the consequences. Then I blocked the number. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the confrontation. It isn't. The hardest part is the quiet that comes after, when the noise dies down and you're left watching consequences unfold without touching them. The firm stabilized faster than I expected. Within hours of David's termination, department heads were asking for meetings. Some were nervous. Others looked relieved. No one asked why he'd really left, and I didn't volunteer it. Leadership transitions don't require confessions, only direction. I stepped into daily operations temporarily. Transparent, available, calm. I didn't posture. I didn't pretend to be something new. I simply became visible. What surprised me most was how quickly people adapted. Within a week, several senior employees approached me privately, carefully, respectfully. They mentioned concerns they'd had about David in recent months. Erratic decisions, unexplained absences, a sharp drop in focus. No one knew why. They just knew something had been wrong. Replacing him wasn't about revenge. It was about competence. Within a month, I hired a new chief operating officer, Michael Reyes. 20 years of experience. No ego, no theatrics, just discipline. His first week, he flagged inefficiencies David had ignored and implemented changes that saved the firm nearly $20,000 a month. Clients noticed. Revenue climbed. Morale followed. Meanwhile, Ethan's world unraveled quietly. He moved out of the apartment on day 71, one day before legal eviction. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved back in with his parents. His social media went dark except for vague posts about growth and learning from mistakes. His parents reached out. His father called me directly, apologized, said they were devastated, said they didn't recognize the man their son had become. I thanked him, told him I wished them well, and that was that. David tried to start over in Seattle, tried launching his own consulting firm, burned through his savings, failed quietly. His professional reputation never recovered. He still owns 20% of my company. He receives quarterly distributions, and he has absolutely no control over what we build without him. I consider that poetic. As for me, the firm crossed $10 million in annual revenue this year. Richard retired fully and sold me his remaining stake. I now own 80%. I'm financially independent. I'm emotionally untethered. And I learned something invaluable. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it acts.